Where is
Just up the road from you, Richard. Different zone to you, different time zone.
I've just had to give Trish a run up the hill because she couldn't get up Mill Lane in her VW Estate front wheel drive. It got about 2 feet before it spun. Useless thing.
Well, I'll tell you, if you managed to push that up the hill, you're a very strong guy.
No, I reversed all the way back down to Boston Mill Lane and got a run up at it.
Right. Yes, it was bad yesterday. My kids were out gritting the hill in front of our house, which was very public spirited of them.
It was, yeah. Well, I've just driven up it, and it was very nice. Thank you.
I've told them that they've done a very good job. I've ordered some yellow high vis for them now.
Okay, we'll make a start. I'm just going to mute everybody. I'm also going to allow the speaker to present when the time comes. Okay. Hello and welcome everybody to this meeting of the Rotary Club of Leicester. It's the 25th of January. Welcome all. I'd just like to say hello to a few guests that I can see. We've got Diana Thurston and is it Burke? Did I get the name right? Yes, okay, good to have you both with us. And we have Pam Spokes, good to have you with us again. And I can see lots of members. We have about 26 with us today, including guests, so that's wonderful to see, as always. Do we have any greetings from other clubs? No, none today, okay. We do have an EGM. Just give me a thumbs up if you've all had the email from Barry. Okay, so this is for the benevolent donation of £1,000 to Charity Link. Could I have a proposer? Yes, Simon? And a seconder? Yes, David Howard? And vote, all those in favour? Okay, yeah, that's passed. Thank you, everybody. Just a couple of comments. Derek Hull, I heard some discussion around this just after I joined. I've been informed he's had a fall at home and he's doing all right and he should be back with us soon. So he's at the Leicester Royal. Richard, you said you'll check up on him, is that right? I thought I heard you say, okay. So Richard's going to check up on Derek. We have unfortunately had a long-standing member, Eddie Watts, pass away this morning. So Rodney passed on the news to me just before the meeting. So perhaps we'll forward details once we have them of the arrangements around the funeral and everything. I'll leave that with his family to organise, let us know. And also I've been informed of the death of Ken Webster on the 11th of January. And just for those of you who don't know much about Ken, he came to the City Council as Deputy City Treasurer in 1971, and he was promoted to City Treasurer in 1972, joining our club very soon afterwards. After his retirement from the City Council in 1983, he remained an active and popular member of the club, including serving as Treasurer until 2006, when he moved to Hexham, Northumberland, to be closer to his family. Barry has sent out details with funeral details, an email with funeral details. Okay, on our various fundraising and other projects, Barry, myself, and David Brunton had a very positive discussion with the Rotary Club of Hitchin Tile House, who have been working with Rotary for food banks, and they gave us some very good advice. One tip they gave us was that many food banks in their area actually have way too much food that they can distribute and not enough other items that people need, for example, toiletries and that type of thing. So that was very useful to know. and we will be going back to our food banks and trying to assess what their needs really are in terms of their user base, because we don't want to be limiting them just to food if we can also supply other items. So I believe our Morrison's platform that we've been given through the Rotary for Food Bank scheme will allow them to purchase other items. If it doesn't, we do have a solution through the issuance of vouchers, which some food banks may find are an appropriate way for their users to acquire the other items they need, which might not be supplied by the food bank. We're talking soaps, deodorants, you know, all those toothbrushes, toothpaste. I don't know. There's a whole load of things that wouldn't be covered by traditional food bank food delivery from us. So that's something we're working on, and I'm keen to pursue that, because although it's more work for us, I think it's important that any money we've raised and subsequently give away, we allocate it as intelligently and as accurately as possible according to people's needs. I don't want to see any of it wasted in any way. So we're spending that time to make sure we get it right in terms of what each what would benefit the users of the food banks we're working with. So that's that. Our volunteers from university, many of them are kind of in limbo at the moment, trying to get flights back to the UK. So as soon as they're back, we'll be able to progress our volunteering work we've been doing with the students at the De Montfort University. And yesterday, the food deliveries with the Midland Lunga service that I've been doing every Sunday were understandably cancelled because it just wasn't safe. So they did contact me again today, and whether I'd like to go at 3 o'clock today. I had a quick look out the window, and I thought, my first thought was maybe it's a bit tricky to get around. But then I thought, well, hang on, we are serving people who are stuck at home, and you know, they do really need someone to bring them some food. So I'll be going out at 3 and getting food to people mainly in the city centre. But we do have people delivering all over Leicester. So I think that's great work that particular food bank is doing on a day like this, getting hot food to people who need it. And that's, you know, it makes me proud to be working with them and food banks like that. And for our club, I think it's a nice thing for all of us to feel that we're doing some real good in these difficult times. Okay, so that's pretty much everything on the projects, aside from the updates I normally give. Secretary notices, anything from you, Barry?
Just one thing that will thrill you all. The club is in the semi-final of the district quiz tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. And I'll let you know at next week's meeting how we progress.
So who was in our group?
Patrick, Simon and Roger and myself.
All right, well done.
And that will be the team right through to the final.
Excellent. I was with you for the first one, and there were about 20, I think, altogether, wasn't there?
Well, there's 39. That was a trial. There's 39 teams, and there's the organisers have done a really good job. I didn't think it was possible to have a decent quiz on Zoom, but they've used breakout rooms, and it's yeah, they've given it a lot of thought.
Great. Okay. Anything else to report?
No.
Okay, thank you, Barry. Anything else from other committee chairmen and women?
Can I just raise the point of the surplus or used laptops and iPads for schools? I'm actually collecting another batch at the moment, and they will go as soon as we can get through the snow. So they're going to be refurbished for schools again.
Great. Well done, Rodney. That's great. Sue's just put a message on the chat. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all my fellow Rotarians for supporting the vital work of Charity Link, particularly during these very difficult times. Happy to help, Sue, and keep up the good work. Okay, any other comments from any committee chairmen and women? If not, we can go straight to the speaker. Okay, so today we have Andrew Bloodworth, Senior Science Director at the British Geological Survey, and just tell you a bit about Andrew. He's Director of Science at the British Geological Survey, and his professional and research interests include mineral and metal security, particularly in relation to the growing demand for specialist minerals from the IT industry. Andrew was formerly mining advisor to the UK Department for International Development. Andrew is a Chartered Geologist and Associate Member of the Royal Town Planning Institute. Andrew is a member of the UK Minerals Forum, the CBI's British Industry Minerals Group, and he's going to be talking about the secret life of your mobile phone, metal supply and digital devices. So please take it away, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and thank you for asking me along today. It's very nice to speak to you all, albeit in somewhat unusual circumstances. But I'll just share my screen and hope it works. How's that for everybody? Can you see? Quiet. Yep. Okay, well, again, thank you very much for asking me to speak. I work at the British Geological Survey. For those of you who don't know, it's just up the road from you at Keyworth near Nottingham, so between Nottingham and Leicester. There are about 400 people work there, and we have another big office in Edinburgh in Scotland and a couple of other offices in Cardiff and Belfast. BGS is the National Geological Survey of the UK. It's the oldest geological survey in the world. We're nearly 200 years old. We were founded in 1835. And we're probably one of the top 4 or 5 geological survey organizations working around the world. We work obviously in the UK, but we also work all over the world. The topic, really, the secret life of your mobile phone, is really to try and get you to think about the fact that we live in a material world. As we say in my business, if you can't grow it, you have to mine it. And it's really the mobile phone as a metaphor for our consumption of stuff. You know, whether those are cars, buildings, electronics, other sorts of machinery, all these products are very expensive. And the idea of this talk is to get you to think a bit more about where the stuff that makes your stuff comes from and where it goes to when it comes to the end of its life. I've been working in this area for a long time, and it's like everything else, it's all more complicated than you think it is. Anyway, we'll get going. So why have I got a picture of some rather tough looking guys carrying big guns? These are militiamen in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And those of you who follow the news, although it's not in the news that much, will know that there's been quite a nasty civil war waging in the Democratic Republic of Congo for the last 20 or 30 years. And it's claimed the lives of about 6 million people. And it's really a civil conflict over resources, and particularly the sorts of resources that go into your mobile phone. And I'll come back to that later. Similarly, here's a picture of a Japanese Air Force aircraft flying over a lump of rock to the east of Japan, sorry, to the west of Japan, let me get that right, to the west of Japan, called the Senkaku Islands. And the Senkaku Islands are the subject of a dispute between the government of China and the government of Japan. And that dispute over ownership created a big panic about 8 years ago in the supply of rare earths. And the Chinese have a virtual monopoly on rare earth production. And the Chinese electronics and car industry got very, very upset that the Chinese had even threatened to cut off supplies of rare earths over the dispute on these islands. So in my talk, I'll cover why metals are important. We'll think about what's in your mobile phone. We'll think about something called critical metals, because your mobile phone is full of things called critical metals. We'll think a bit about resources and scarcity, and how human factors and access to these materials creates a lot of that scarcity. We'll think about something called the urban mine, and we'll finish by looking at what we really should be worrying about, which is environmental limits, and make some conclusions from that. So minerals and metals are all around us. They're, as I said earlier, if you can't grow it, you have to mine it. They're in our food, or they facilitate production of our food. They're absolutely vital for energy, including renewable energy. The buildings we live in are basically built from minerals and metals, whether you live in a traditional brick built house or you live in a tower block that's got a steel frame. It all has a mineral and metal component to it. Transport systems like roads and cars, railways, aircraft, trains are very, very material intensive. They use a lot of materials, and most of those materials are metals. Their vital functionality in the tech that we use, computers, telecoms, etc., and including our mobile phones. And as I said earlier, they're very important as our economy transforms into a green economy, as we move towards net zero targets that the government is really wanting us to go for because of climate change. These metals and materials are incredibly important in us meeting those targets around a green economy. And we produce huge amounts of these things. Mining and mineral extraction is a major human activity. Around 20 million tons of copper per year, around 3 billion tons of iron ore. That's a lot of iron ore. The world consumes every year, or produces every year, about 1 billion tons of iron and steel, and that comes from about 3 billion tons of iron ore. But we're here to talk about mobile phones, and we live on planet mobile. And these things have become virtually, as we all know, they've become ubiquitous. This is a photograph of the inauguration of Pope Benedict in 2005. He's the last but one Pope. So that was 2005, that's 15, 16 years ago. This was the inauguration of Pope Francis in 2013. And you can see the difference there. Just about everybody in that picture has a mobile phone focused on where Pope Francis would be inaugurated. These things have become absolutely ubiquitous. And the thing about mobiles is they contain quite a lot of materials, different materials, about 60 different chemical elements, most of which are metals. Very varying amounts, from very small amounts of silver and gold and platinum group metals like palladium to larger amounts of metals called cobalt, and there's lots and lots of others. Where do they sit in your phone? Well, this is you can see this photograph's going back a few years. This is my old BlackBerry that stopped working and I took it apart. And the shell of the mobile phone is made from plastic, so it's carbon and hydrogen. It might be chromed finish on it, so it might have some chrome on it. The screen has silica and aluminium, sodium and indium. The chassis, the metal chassis of your phone, is usually an alloy of aluminium and magnesium. The vibrator in your phone that makes it buzz when you've got it on silent might be made from a heavy element like tungsten. The SIM card is coated with gold. The battery contains lithium and cobalt, probably nickel as well. But most of those metals are all mixed up together in varying amounts on the circuit board. Silica, copper, tantalum, palladium, gold, aluminium, iron, gallium, arsenic, all sorts of different things. And all those weird and wonderful metals, we haven't been using most of them for very long. We've been using some metals for thousands of years. So metals like tin and copper and iron, we've been using for thousands of years. But as technology progressed in the latter half of the last millennium, the palette of metals that we use as a species has grown and grown. And in the last 50 years, it's grown enormously to become about more than 2/3 of the periodic table. So we've gone from using a relatively small group of metals to using a very, very large group of metals, which vary in abundance and occurrence. All is critical. And in my world, criticality means talking about how valuable those metals are to our economy versus the risk of their supply being disrupted. And if you work in the car industry or in the aerospace industry or in the electronics industry, you have to worry about whether the metals you're using in your products are critical metals and whether they are vulnerable to supply shortage. And this group of metals, quite a large group of metals, have some common characteristics. They're often produced in much smaller volumes than industrial metals, often orders of magnitude, excuse me, orders of magnitude less than industrial metals like aluminium and iron and steel and copper. For example, last year, the total production of platinum group metals was about 420 tons. Platinum group metals are really important. If you drive a petrol or a diesel car, they have a catalyst in them made from either palladium or platinum. You cannot make fertilizer, you cannot make hydrocarbons without platinum catalysts. But bear in mind, only 420 tons of platinum group metals were produced last year. That's against getting on for 3.3 billion tons of iron ore. So it's a massive difference in the volumes of these things. The other thing about these metals is they're often not produced in their own right. They're produced as a byproduct of the production of other metals. So for instance, indium, which is used to give the conductive coating on your mobile phone screen, that nowhere in the world is there an indium mine. It's all produced as a byproduct of zinc mining. They're often very difficult to extract and process. They have what we would call difficult extractive metallurgy. They're difficult to refine. The level of technological sophistication required to do it is often very high. They're vulnerable to something we call production concentration because they're not produced in very large amounts. There's only a very few mines producing many of these metals. And so they can be very vulnerable to that production being disrupted. If your production if 50% of the production comes from one mine, which it does for some of these, then if that mine closes, you've got a problem. And it can lead to price volatility. And the other really important thing about it is we're not very good at recycling them. So with one or two very notable exceptions, we are very, very poor at recycling these metals compared to, say, iron and steel or copper. But demand for them is growing, and pretty much if you plot any of these metals on a curve of production versus time, you see this sort of hockey stick curve. And we're mining them in ever increasing quantities. So lithium, for instance, 70% of the lithium that mankind has ever mined has been mined since 1980. So we are mining very large amounts of these materials. We're mining relatively large amounts of these materials over the last few years. So the production of them is growing quite quickly. So are we going to run out of them? And that's a question I'm often asked, you know, when are we going to run out of this? When are we going to run out of rare earths? Or when are we going to run out of lithium? And this fear of physical scarcity has been around for a long time. It was the original idea around resource scarcity was brought up by the 18th century political economist Thomas Malthus, who wrote an essay on the principle of population. And he postulated that mankind would, as population grew, would run out of resources. And the Victorians worried about running out of coal, and President Eisenhower worried about running out of raw materials after the Second World War. And then I'm guessing a few people on this Zoom, including me, remember things like the Club of Rome in the 1970s, which published the limits to growth and postulated that we were going to run out of oil by 1990. And then latterly, after the turn of the millennium, physical scarcity came back as a topic as the big Asian economies grew, and there were various people, including the New Scientists and Nature, the journal Nature, which ran articles saying that we were likely to run out of things. Well, the good news from my perspective as a geologist in this area is that we're not going to run out of anything anytime soon. I mean, okay, the planet is a finite place, but take it from me, the Earth's crust is very large and there's a lot of it. And my colleague Per Weihed at Luleå University in Sweden came up with this table, which just shows the sheer amount of material. The numbers in the right-hand column there are very, very large numbers. So there's a lot of material in the Earth's crust. We just haven't found it yet or extracted it yet. And the reason we've been able to keep up with this burgeoning demand is because we've been getting much better at understanding where deposits are, finding those deposits, and then the technology to delineate those deposits. And a lot of my colleagues at the British Geological Survey and our colleagues at Leicester University and other local universities are extremely good and put a lot of it, there's a lot of research goes into this topic. We're very good at acquiring data now, using new methods to look into the Earth and look at the chemistry of the Earth. We're very good at that sort of work generates huge amounts of data, but we now have the machines, the computers that can crunch those numbers and better understand those numbers and better enable us to analyze and model those numbers to find out where these materials occur in the Earth. And once we've found them, we are getting much better at extracting them. The picture on the bottom left there is a mine called Olympic Dam in South Australia. This is the largest copper uranium mine in the world. 50 years ago, we didn't know that the deposit that's mining even existed. And this is now one of the world's biggest mines. The picture on the right was taken at the mine at Scorpion, which is in southern Namibia in Southwest Africa. And again, this is a very, very large deposit of zinc. Zinc is used amongst many other things, but its most important use is in galvanizing vehicle bodies to stop them going rusty. And this plant uses a completely new form of extraction called solvent extraction. So the zinc ore isn't smelted in a conventional furnace like you would with most ore bodies. This material is extracted using chemicals. And this has unlocked a lot of deposits which previously were impossible to process using conventional smelting technology. So this is an advancement not in geology but in extractive chemistry, if you like. Where will these metals come from in the future? Well, they'll come from new places like Central Asia. This is a deposit I worked on in Afghanistan, which is a very large copper deposit. As the Arctic sea ice retreats, which it is doing, there's been something of a mineral boom around the Arctic Ocean as you can get bigger ships into and access places which were previously very difficult to get into. The biggest place that new metals will come from in the future is around where we've always mined metals. So there'll be new targets around mines, and this is a picture of a place called Hemerdon near Plymouth in Devon. And we've known about this deposit, and it's next door to another mine. We've known about this deposit for getting on for 200 years, but no one's mined it and to date because we didn't have the technology to mine it, but now we do. And now there's a big tungsten mine there. At some point in the next 50 years, we'll probably start moving into the deep ocean because there are abundant metal resources in the deep ocean, although there are some huge question marks around the environmental sustainability of mining those deposits. And of course, we'll look to something called the urban mine, which is the mines, the metals and materials that are in our human environment. So in the buildings, in the vehicles, in all the tech that we use. And these things are stuffed full of metals. We've just got to access them and process them to access them. What else stops us getting, and I've alluded to this already, getting at these metals is nothing to do with geology. It's to do with the fact that supply for some of these so-called critical metals has become very concentrated in a few countries. And in the past, this is figures from where antimony, I've just picked a couple of examples, antimony, which is used in flame-proofing things and various other chemicals, rare earth oxides, which are used in particularly to make small electric motors. And in the 1960s, these came from quite a wide range of countries. But what's happened over the last 50 years or so is that production has become very concentrated in one country in particular. Unfortunately, my version of of PowerPoint has changed the colors here. The teal blue segments on that are China. And you can see how in 2010, compared to 1960, how concentrated production of antimony, world production of antimony and world production of rare earth oxides became in China. China has a virtual monopoly on rare earths, and small electric motors, such as would go in an electric vehicle, or power the window in your electric vehicle, or power your food mixer, or indeed form the gubbins that generates electricity in a wind turbine, is made from rare earth oxide. And China supplies about 90% of the world's rare earths. And if that production becomes concentrated, then you start to see countries realizing how important those resources are and trying to exert control. So you have increased tension between those who have resources and those who have not. And there's nothing new in that. The world has seen resource wars before, but it probably will unfortunately see them again, where you have conflict and pressure applied because the people who want those resources don't always have them, and the people who have them try to exert control over those who don't. The other issue that you have with these so-called critical metals is that they're subject to the demand for these metals can vary enormously depending on which way technological developments go. And a good example of that will be, again, is mobile phones, where various different battery technologies have been tried, some of which include metals like lithium and cobalt, and some of which don't. And if you're looking to invest in one of these mines producing lithium or cobalt, you want to be sure you're going to get a return on your investment. And if technology changes, you go from that VHS to Betamax to VHS, you may indeed see demand for that particular material collapse. So these things are not that popular with investors, and it makes establishing operations on these types of metals sometimes quite difficult, particularly in the West. It's probably one of the areas where the Chinese have been very successful because they've had quite a lot of state intervention in their sector, whereas in the West, we don't tend to do that. The other, and I alluded to this right at the beginning of the talk, the other issue with critical metals that go into your mobile phone is that often they can come from what we would call small scale mining. These are people generally in poorer countries in Africa and Asia and South America who are producing some of these metals, literally like this lady is on the right, with a hammer and a chisel. So you get armies of very, very poor people working in small mines, a bit like the one on the bottom right there, and mining these things. These mines in some parts of the world, particularly in Africa, are often associated with corruption and conflict, hence my reference to the civil war in the Democratic Republic of Congo earlier. And they may be producing minerals like coltan, which is columbite tantalite. Your mobile, if you've got a mobile phone, you have a little piece of tantalum in your hand, because on that mobile phone circuit board, there is a capacitor made from tantalum. And you probably also heard of things like blood diamonds and that sort of thing. So there are quite strong links between what goes into your mobile, some of the metals that go into your mobile phone, and people like these people pictured on the right here. And I mentioned the urban mine. Your mobile phone, as I said, is full of metal. They consume quite a lot of metal. And so there is this potential for extracting the metals from these mobile devices when they come to the end of their lives, and recovering that metal and recycling that metal. The problem is that mobile phones, along with all sorts of other products that we use, from televisions to cars to aircraft, are incredibly complicated mixtures of lots and lots of different metals. And when we manufacture these things, put these metals together in combinations that nature doesn't, which means that when we come to try and extract those metals again, we're up against some very fundamental principles around thermodynamics, where it's hard to extract one group of chemically similar metals from another group of chemically similar metals. And what that translates to is that even if you recycle your mobile phone, only about 50% of the total metal content of that phone can be recovered, because much of that metal content is present in such small amounts it's not economic to recover it in an individual phone. And as I say, some of those metals are combined in groups that are very hard thermodynamically to separate from each other. So we're currently not designing mobile phones and many, many other products in the right way to make them easy to recycle and easy to reuse afterwards. So this is a penultimate slide. What if we're not going to run out of these metals? Why are we worried? Well, I would say we really do need to worry about, we're not approaching the physical limits of our planet in terms of the amount of copper we're mining or the amount of rare earth we're mining, but we are approaching the environmental limits of our planet in terms of the amount of CO2 or other greenhouse gases we can put into the atmosphere, or how much water we can extract in various parts of the world, or how much habitat we can destroy in various parts of the world. And to focus on energy for a minute, extracting metal requires an enormous amount of energy. Depending on what you read, figures vary, but something between 5 and 10% of total energy used by mankind in the world every year goes on extracting metal from rocks. It's very, very energy intensive process. And as we mine out high grade deposits where there's a lot of metal relative to the rock around it, and we get into lower grade metals where there's only a small amount, we're using even more energy. So we really need to put a lot of time and effort into innovating around extraction to break that link between our metal use and greenhouse gas emissions. And I mentioned earlier this solvent extraction process for that zinc mine in Namibia. This is one way that we can break that link, because if we can use solvents to extract the metal from rocks and then electrowind them using low carbon electricity, then we've, for the first time in human history, we've broken that link between chucking loads of greenhouse gas into the atmosphere and extracting metal. And of course, the other way we need to do it is to look at what's in our urban mine, what's in the stuff we surround ourselves with, and how can we recover the metal from that? Because recovering metal as recyclates generally is much more energy efficient than recovering it, than trying to recover metals from rocks. And we need to move towards a more circular economy. So we need to reduce demand by being more efficient with our resources, by lightweighting, doing more with less. We need to design products for remanufacturing and recycling. We need to have that in mind when we design products and manufacture. And mobile phones are a great example of where we perhaps need to shift the emphasis from the product, this thing. My daughter is in her early 20s and she views a new one of these every 2 years as a human right. Apple sell these to us as fashion accessories. What we really want them for is the service they deliver. That's the real value in these phones, is they deliver all sorts of fantastically useful services to us. I'm not anti-mobile phone, but we need to think about them in a different way. And so instead of the average life of a mobile phone being 21 months, we should perhaps try and make it 20 years. So we need to think about new business models for products. But we also have to accept that a circular economy can never be truly circular, and that there'll always be leakage from that economy. So we will continue to need to extract minerals from the Earth's crust in the most sustainable way we can. So that sustainable supply, although we're not going to run out of anything, sustainable supply of metals for mobile devices and everything else isn't certain because of various factors, including those human factors I talked about. We're not going to run out of anything, so physical exhaustion isn't an issue. Primary resources and urban mine are an abundant resource, but we can't always access these things when we want to, and they're not always in a form that's easy to access. And there are a lot of human factors get in the way, like resource nationalism, geopolitics. There's issues around the business models for mining, which present an immediate supply risk to some metals. But the thing we really need to worry about, and this is what I'd like you to take home, is that it's environmental limits, particularly greenhouse gases, which will really restrain our conspicuous consumption. So a final message from your mobile phone is, remember, if you can't grow it, you have to mine it. And when you buy stuff, think about the fact that somewhere in the world, there's a hole in the ground that material's come out of. So appreciate the resource consequences of your conspicuous consumption. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Happy to answer questions, if any.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for a fascinating talk on a very important topic. I'm just going to...
I'll stop sharing my screen, by the way.
Oh yeah, that'd be handy. Yeah, great. I can see everybody now. So if you do have a question, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Just an observation, if I can.
Yes, John.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That was really interesting, Andrew. I guess that vanity thing around mobile phones and other devices is, I mean, as you said, it's a big issue, but hard to imagine changing. As younger generation get older, but it's just a part of their culture, having these devices and wanting more and more. And I guess things like open banking now, it's not just communication, is it? It's banking and everything else that happens that it's just feels like it's a harsh reality that vanity is going to win out.
Yeah, I think I think on the plus side, there is some evidence. You can plot per capita income in a country against material consumption, and generally that they plot along the same trajectory. There's some evidence now from shall we say, the Western economies that we're actually starting to decouple income from consumption, and that people talk about we've reached peak stuff. That we're actually now starting to see people valuing things that last longer. And you can see the policy community, governments, for instance, in Europe, there are directives now about repair that devices have to be repairable because so many devices are not built that way. It's still really early days and there's a lot to go, but people like Elon Musk are talking about the 20-year car, the 30-year car. And again, I think there's a move in some businesses towards service delivery rather than selling product, selling a physical product. Rolls-Royce now don't sell anyone aero engines, they sell power by the hour, which means they retain ownership of the engine, and they just sell British Airways or Emirates power. And these are business models that are easier to apply in some industries than others, and these things are quite difficult. I mean, when I was a kid, and I'm guessing a few people on this call are the same, everybody rented their TV and you had a man come and repair it now and again. I mean, that's inconceivable now, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you. We have time for one more. Yes, David Brent. Oh, sorry, Tim. Tim was muted.
Hi, Andrew. Is there any link between the Chinese landing on the moon and any resources over there? Is there are we starting to explore what is outside of the Earth now for these resources?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk, and there's quite a lot of literature now on resources in extraterrestrial resources, as it were. What I would say is that the costs of bringing it back here are so high at the moment that it seems almost inconceivable to me. It's a bit like deep sea resources at the moment. You know, there's a lot of people talking about, you know, cobalt and other metals on the deep ocean floor, but the technology for that largely exists already. But the problems, you know, the costs of doing that are enormous, and if you go into space, it's even more so. I mean, I can't conceive that it won't happen at some point in the sort of distant, but I think it's a long way off yet. I really do. I think it's a long way off.
Okay, yeah, final question from David.
You've spoken a lot about metals. Where do we stand on the availability of rock for construction and the like?
There's a lot of rock. Resources are very large, but they're not always very conveniently located, or more to the point, they're often located in places where people don't want to see any extraction. Of course, that's a big in Leicester, because you're sitting on the closest granite to London.
I am.
And I think that in those cases, you see, you know, the permitting system having to balance the various interests of local populations versus, you know, the demand that comes from big centres of population like London. Personally, I think that you'll see, as resources of rock become more constrained, particularly in southeast England, there'll be more creative approaches used, including, I'm sure at some point, for instance, in the Charnwood area, you'll see underground mining of rock away from the open quarrying. Open quarrying is much cheaper, but where you have a premium resource like you have in Charnwood, I think you might see at some point in the maybe next 20, 30 years, some of those current quarries going underground.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'll now pass to Patrick for a vote of thanks.
Yeah, just let me get my...
You've just muted yourself, Patrick.
Right.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the things we've learned from this dreadful virus is that the communication like today is possible. You can have one of the world experts coming in to talk to the club of 25 members present today. And Andrew is particularly well known in this field, and it's very good indeed. Thanks to him for coming and presenting us and to opening our minds on this one. The Geological Survey is an extraordinary resource. They were talking about the availability of stone. I remember that looking up and seeing that the initial defenses of Gibraltar were all based on limestone from Plymouth, taken on sailing ships. It wasn't until some 50, 60 years later that it was discovered that exactly the same limestone is available on the Rock of Gibraltar anyway. But the stuff is around, and my own experience going back 25 years or more, when I was on the advisory council for the Institute of Geological Sciences, it then was, we were shown some secret survey work that was being done in the offshore areas of the Falkland Islands. And I think several of us saw that that was going to be where the next war was going to break out because of the very substantial potential oil resources there. And finally, I would say I was, when I was doing some work for the UN, I spent some weeks in Mongolia, and I visited there the newly formed at that time, 15 years ago, Rotary Club of Ulaanbaatar. And we had a very interesting discussion, very much on the lines that Andrew's been talking about today. And I remember one of the members there saying, yeah, it's true, the word World War III is going to be over water, but World War IV is going to be over rare earths.
Yeah.
And at that time they're still trying to develop their own competition with China, but China and Japan in particular are piling into that country, looking for these sort of materials. But so I think we've got to watch out there, and I think particularly the issue of we need to be concerned about the last point that Andrew was making at the end there. We really need to look at conservation of things and materials, and not just conservation of landscape and gases and so on. So thank you very much indeed, Andrew. People now do know that one of the greatest centres in the world is just, I think it's 19 miles away. I go to Keyworth quite frequently. Used to did when we weren't locked up. But so we have got on our doorstep this extraordinary resource and these extraordinary people doing this extraordinary science, like Andrew. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we've got time for a quick update from Richard. If you'd like to give us any insights into what's going on at the Leicester hospitals.
Well, I would, except I spent the last week walking 120 kilometres around the Leicestershire Wolds, so I can't. But I'll be back. I will next week. I'm working most of this week, so I'll update you next week.
Okay, thank you. Next week, if everybody could just unmute themselves as I just finish up, we can all say goodbye to each other. Next week, we've got Alan Jukes, District 1070 Youth Leader, speaking to us about Road Track and Me, then and now. So look forward to that. There are no meetings after lunch. Attendance was 26 earlier on, it's now 23. So great to have you all with us. Stay safe. I look forward to seeing you all next week. So this meeting stands adjourned. Goodbye. Take care.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Andrew.